The next project is one that I'm also peripherally involved in, but is really led by Patrick Juola, who's at Duquesne in computer science, but he works in humanities computing. He has adapted an idea out of mathematics where somebody developed a program called Graffiti that generated mathematical theorems, I think it was. But he's adapted this to the study of literature, and he calls it the conjecturator. And what it does is this. When we ran this on the HPC consortium that we have here in Western Canada called WestGrid, what we had was we had 250 novels from the 19th century in English, full text and a certain amount of metadata, the gender of the author, the date, and that sort of stuff. We also had a semantic thesaurus, a sort of collection of categories of words. So if you were interested in shirts, what were all the shirt words? And what the conjecturator does is it generates random conjectures, like shirt words are used more in the 1850s, in novels in the 1850s than they are in the 1840s, and then it actually tests those conjectures. And if it turns out that there's a statistically significant difference between the use of shirt words in the 1850s and the 1840s, then it records that as an assertion. This is exciting because in some ways the problem we have with large data sets is that search doesn't work anymore. We don't know what to search for. Our problem is not finding the needle in the haystack. Our problem is what is the shape of the haystack, or what needles should I look for in the first place? So the conjecturator is designed to try to generate interesting assertions based on large data sets, which we could then follow up. And often, as is often the case, these assertions turn out to be actually uninteresting and trivial. They're either due to some linguistic things, or in 1853 there happened to be a novel that was called The Shirt, and the digitization of that, repeated the word shirt and the header over and over again, and that threw off the thing, or so on and so on. But sometimes they generate interesting assertions which lead to new forms of inquiry. When we ran this particular process, you can imagine the amount of calculations. If you can generate billions of these conjectures, every possible combination of comparisons can be generated. We actually used up something, I think we used up approximately 184 compute days over 2 days with this process, just with a little limited data set. And here is the real problem we came up with. The downside of high-performance computer is it generated close to 100,000 interesting or statistically interesting assertions. So now we have the problem of what to do with large data sets, and one type of answer produces too many answers, or one type of process produces 100,000 answers. And so what you're seeing on the screen there in the lower left-hand corner is you're actually seeing a visualization tool we put together to try to chain together some of these assertions, especially the ones, the historic ones. So you can see if this is a trend, if a semantic category goes up from one decade to the other, does it then go up the next decade, and so on and so on. So we can begin to extract from 100,000, we can get it down to something that a Victorian literature specialist might want to actually follow through and think about. Next slide, please. The next project, and this is the last one I'm going to talk about, and this is a project, this is actually an example of a very fruitful direction that people are taking at UCSD, in particular in what is called the Software Studies Initiative, led by Lev Manovich and others. Lev Manovich is the author of The Language of New Media, for those of you who are interested. And what they're doing is they're trying to figure out how they can apply the analytic techniques that have been developed in computational linguistics and humanities computing and computer science, how they can apply these techniques to non-textual cultural data sets. And what you're seeing here is a picture of a project that is looking at, I think it's something like 1 million pages of manga. And they're trying to see what they can learn when they use analytic techniques on large image data sets in this case. What they can learn about composition, what they can learn about, you can use things like face recognition software to figure out where people generally appear and what proportions of people and so on like that, where they appear in a manga novel and so on like that. This particular project is led by a postdoc at the Software Studies Initiative and a researcher at Bremen. But the other thing that's interesting about this, not just that they're trying to apply analytic techniques to non-textual data sets. The other thing that's interesting is they're trying to find ways to visualize and to use data walls or video walls as a way of studying these materials. And you see them in front of the Hyperwall, which is a technology developed at the California Institute for Telecommunications and Information Technology. It's approximately 50 Mac 30-inch displays with a total resolution of 25,600 by 8,000 pixels. I mean, that's the technology. But from the research perspective, it changes the way you stand before information. It changes the way people can negotiate and discuss what's interesting. It changes the way you present it back. And humanists are by no means the only people. I mean, the sciences have been way ahead of us in exploring different visualization technologies, from caves to large screen displays to now these types of tiled walls, as a way of allowing people to manage large amounts of information and present it back to stakeholders. But this is an example from the humanities, and one of many at the Software Studies Initiative, and for that matter, other places are doing similar stuff. So if you could move to the next slide. I now want to talk a little bit about, let's say I've actually convinced you. Actually, I know you were all convinced before this talk, and I'm just sort of rehashing the obvious. But let's say I've actually convinced you that it might be interesting to develop infrastructure or to work with humanists and artists, designers, social scientists, and to imagine projects that cross these types of disciplinary lines. How would you go about doing that? And I've been involved in organizing 2 different workshops, meetings here in Canada that were designed to develop recommendations. And I'm happy to say I've actually we're beginning to see the first fruit in that these recommendations are being followed on, and our national high-performance computing consortium, Compute Canada, has actually begun to follow up on these, along with some of the individual consortia. But these are this is a sort of boiled down version of some of the things you might want to think about. The first one is to think about the difference in how people in the social sciences, arts, and humanities do research. We don't do big question research. Of course we're asking big questions. I'm in philosophy. What is the good? What is justice? Those are big questions. But we don't quite ask them in a way where we can formalize it, run a single, pop a single process into the queue, wait for a week, use up 2,000 processors, and get back an answer, 42. We tend to do much more iterative inquiry, dialogical inquiry. We ask lots of questions over and over again. And as a result, people who are trying to support research computing in the humanities, you can't take the way most HPC facilities have been designed, where you want access to the processors, you have to set it up, you have to put it in the queue and wait until the thing is run, and then you get your answer back. Most of what we need is always on processes. And that's partly because, and I'm jumping to the third point here, that's partly because when we do this type of work, we tend to make it available to a much larger community. We don't just run it, get the answer, publish the paper, stuff disappears. The Old Bailey project is not of interest only to the 10 historians at Sheffield. It is also of interest to just about anyone whose relatives passed through the Old Bailey. So we tend to, as part of our practice, we tend to return the results in a form that all sorts of people can study. This, by the way, has a political advantage. I don't know if that's true down where you are, but in Canada, people have begun to ask questions. Why are we pouring millions of dollars into HPC facilities that get used by 3 astrophysicists? And a nice way to sort of dramatically expand the number of people who use your facilities is to bring on the humanities and social science scholars, who then do things that get used by tens of thousands of people. And some of these projects get thousands of hits a day. So back to the question of how do you support it? First thing is understanding the difference in our research practices. The second thing is, of course, developing training in outreach. I've been working with HPC consortia like SharkNet and WestGrid to develop some of these. the short answer is talk to your local digital humanist. Every campus has, every serious university, and I know UND certainly has this because I was just down there, has people already have an excellent understanding of computing, the opportunities and the links to other people who can help you figure out how training might work, who might be trained. Start with the power users. Then moving on, two of the sweet spots are visualization.